Good evening. In a new report, the State Bank of India has expressed its concerns about a third wave. They've also raised their concerns on household debt rising. But what about green shoots in the economy? What is this essentially linked to? I'll be joined in the next few minutes by the Chief Economic Advisor of the State Bank of India. But first, let's go through some of the key points of this report, which says that global data shows that on an average, a third wave peak, cases are around 1.7 times the peak of cases at the time of the second wave. Now, as far as India is concerned, cases can start rising by the second fortnight of August. Now, the beginning of the second wave has resulted in India in a significant deposit outflow from the banking system. That's a cause of concern. Household debt has sharply increased to 37.3% of GDP in financial year 2020-2021 from 32.5% of GDP in in the last financial year. Now, the decline in bank deposits in financial year 21 and the increase in health expenditure may result in further increases in household debt in the next financial year, FY22. Now, various indicators have shown some sorts of economic activity in some sectors in June 2021. So that's the overall sort of summary of some of the main points. Joining us now, Kanti Ghosh, the Chief Economic Advisor of the State Bank of India. Thanks very much for being with us. Now, one of the key points that you mentioned is that as far as a third wave is concerned, if you look at what's happening in other parts of the world, it's 1.7, roughly 1.7% of what we've seen, right? What exactly are the numbers you're looking at in India if it were to happen?
Yeah, thank you, Vishnu. First, let me say that I am not an epidemiologist. So what we have done is basically based on the historical trends across countries. And interestingly, in the first wave when India happened, if you remember that the first wave, the peak was around 97,860. The second wave, the peak was around 4,14,000, which I think happened on 7th May. So the number of times the second wave was actually 4.2 times for India, but which on an average for other countries is actually around 5 times. So from that point of view, India's peak was a little lower than the second wave peak was a little lower than the first wave. Now, if we juxtapose that and move it forward to the third wave, we can see that the third wave average peak is around 1.7 times across countries. If we take an average, the average actually varies widely from 0.3 to 3.9 times of the second wave. But the only important thing which I would like to say over here is that the peak will entirely depend on how far we are able to vaccinate and how serious will be any second round of infection, for example, like the Delta variant, which is already playing a lot of havoc in countries like Israel, where even 60% of the population have been vaccinated. So even if I go at the current vaccination rate, and again, purely going by the historical trends, the number of cases could rapidly decline in the next 10 or 15 days to around 10,000. And then again, based on historical trends, if you go forward 40 days, because that's the lag between the bottom of the second wave to the beginning of a third wave that it takes for the third wave to start. So if that is the case, so that's why you are saying maybe towards the end of August. But hopefully, the infections may not be serious if you are able to vaccinate a larger segment of the population in the next 2 months.
So 1.7 times the peak of the peak cases at the time of the second wave. So the numbers in India would still be very, very large, is what you're saying. We're looking at case load.
So see, basically it will entirely depend. The number could actually, I mean, as I have said right now, 1.7 times is the average. There are examples of countries like France, where it was as low as 0.3 times, and countries like USA and Japan, which was 3.9 times. So we hope that the number of cases in the third wave could actually be lower than what is in the first wave. But again, I want to repeat is that even if suppose the number of cases on the higher side, if you are able to control the hospitalization rate, I think then the fatality rate could be significantly on the lower side. So I think what we should focus purely right now on is the health infrastructure, so that the fatalities are much lower, even if the cases possibly go on the higher side. Because third wave, again, the cases will decline very rapidly. And possibly, I mean, we may be through with the waves this year.
Sure, but you see, but sadly, the numbers in terms of vaccines and their availability is not where we want to be. In fact, the center has revised the numbers downwards, and that might have a direct proportion to people who are vaccinated. It's bound to. So unless there is an uptick on that, then, it affects everything, including the economy. Be that as it may, you've also mentioned that the beginning of the second wave has resulted in a significant outflow of deposits from the banking system. To what extent has this taken place, and is this an indicator of distress?
No, I think surely, I think, Vishnu, if you look into the overall deposit accretion in the banking system last year, overall the deposit accretion in the banking system last year was positive, but there was a significant deposit outflow between April to December. I think we have mentioned in the report around 1 lakh crores, but the good thing is that in January to March, we had pulled back a lot after that. But unfortunately, as the second wave started, there has been significant deposit outflow again in the months of April and May. But in June, I think again we have pulled back, because if you look at the successive fortnight of deposit contraction in the report, you will see that the numbers have now come down to around 14,000 crore for the last fortnight. So this is basically a very interesting story. Things improve, then deteriorate, then again improve. So the only hope is that if the cases doesn't so, we may be able to maintain a positive deposit accretion trend throughout the next couple of months, if things go at the current rate.
So, final question, and you've had this in bold in your report. Household debt has sharply increased to 37.3% of GDP in FY21. Is this perhaps your biggest concern going forward?
No, yeah, I think it's a point of concern, because household debt to GDP ratio has increased significantly, I think by 480 basis points last year, and on all counts, this could actually increase further this year. So that's a point of concern. But the only thing here also, the point to mention is that at 37.3%, it is still the lowest across many countries, but that also masks the per capita income in India. But keeping aside all that, I think what is important to note is that beyond a point of time, if this continues to rise, I think that, and given the fact that last year the consumption also declined significantly, I think if you look into the private panel consumption expenditure, that has also declined by around 7%. So if that is the case, I think at some point of time, the household debt to GDP ratio needs to stabilize at some lower levels so that the consumption can start picking up. Otherwise, if it's a debt finance consumption, then it could also have some consequences of inflation and other macro numbers.
All right, Kanti Ghosh, thank you very much for joining us with those details.